Hey everyone, so today we're going to be completing a close read on the text, The Girl Who Acted Before Rosa Parks. And before we do that, of course, we want to make connections to the Hope Chest. So if you have your book, please grab it now, and we're going to reread a couple of pages from the Hope Chest first to start our thinking. So if you can please turn to page 86 in your book, 86. We're at the bottom of it, starting with the conductor. It's also right here on the screen, so whatever you choose to look at is fine. So either here or on the screen. And we're going to read to page 88. All right, so now that we have that, it's good to go. You read chapter 7 yesterday, so keep that in mind that you have read this before, but we're going to reread a couple of these pages and just think about what it's saying. Here we go. The conductor came along checking tickets and stopped when he got to their party. He stood over Myrtle, looking down at her disapprovingly. "This won't do," he said. Myrtle looked up at him, her face expressionless. The skirt of her blue dress was spread out on the red mohair seat, and her feet in their high-topped black shoes swung a few inches above the floor. He towered over her. "What won't do?" Mr. Martin demanded sharply. He and Miss Dexter were sitting on the seat opposite Violet and Myrtle. "The colored girl. She's going to have to ride in the colored car." "That's not the law in Washington," Mr. Martin said. "Mr. Martin, please," Miss Dexter murmured. "Well, it's not," said Mr. Martin. "Maybe not, but once we get moving, we'll only be in Washington for a few minutes," said the conductor. "As soon as we cross the district border, the girl needs to go in the colored car and stay there." "But she can't ride by herself. She's just a child," Mr. Martin said. The conductor shrugged. "She'll be among her own people. I'm sure they'll look after her." Mr. Martin got to his feet, his face twisting into an ugly scowl that made his scar look more menacing. He no longer looked like polite Mr. Martin. He looked like some dangerous thug in a moving picture show. Violet felt a lurch in her stomach. She had never seen adults fight before, and she didn't want to. Violet looked at Myrtle and then at Miss Dexter. Miss Dexter was determinedly looking out the window. Violet looked back at Myrtle, who looked away. Violet was sure there was nothing Mr. Martin, let alone Violet herself, could do. Rules were rules, but it seemed really unfair to Myrtle. She reached out and took Myrtle's hand and glared at the conductor. The conductor ignored her. "I'm sorry, sir," he said to Mr. Martin, not sounding sorry at all. "You can keep her in here for a few minutes if you want, but once we cross the district line, we'll be under Virginia law. It is my responsibility to enforce the law." He smiled thinly. "And to have anyone who doesn't comply arrested." The last sentence seemed to deflate Mr. Martin, like an inner tube with a pin stuck in it. His face went from red to pink to pale, and his fists unmade themselves. The conductor pressed his advantage. The ticket discount is only on this tourist car, sir. It'll be an extra $2 for the child's ticket in the colored car, or $1 if she's under 8. "I'm 7, said Myrtle. She held Violet's hand tightly, but still didn't look at her. Her eyes had been going from Mr. Martin to the conductor and back to Mr. Martin, like someone watching a tennis match. Mr. Martin reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of change. He counted 4 silver quarters. All the fight had gone out of him, Violet thought. The conductor pocketed the dollar and made out a ticket, looking victorious. He slapped the ticket down on the seat beside Myrtle. "Hurry up, girl," he said. "The train's about to start moving." Myrtle walked off down the corridor, her head held high. She did not look back. The conductor stalked close behind her. All right, I'm going to stop there. And what I want to talk about on these pages is that this was terribly wrong, right? That they were forcing Myrtle to move from one train to another because of the color of her skin. But this really, truly did happen in these time periods. And I think that's the important part here. And for many years after this. And so in this lesson, you're going to read about a similar event that happened to a girl on a public bus. And so that's when we're going to jump to this. And that's why that connection is going to be important for you to remember that this is the reason why we're reading this, is because this happened to Myrtle in your book, something similar to this. And so now let's read this for a non-fiction text. Okay, so Well, the other important thing is that now there are laws to protect people against this kind of racist behavior. So that's important that that is today, and thank goodness for that, and this was in the past. All right. So now we're going to begin our close reading of The Girl Who Acted Before Rosa Parks. So I just want you to enjoy it. We're first just going to read the whole text one time through. Here we go. After school on March 2nd, 1955. So remember, this, 1920. This, 1955. So this was still happening 35 years later. Okay. After school on March 2nd, 1955, Claudette Colvin walked to downtown Montgomery with 3 of her classmates. She and her friends were going to take the city bus home from school that day. When they boarded the bus, they sat behind the first 5 rows, which were reserved for white passengers. A young white woman boarded the bus after Colvin and her friends and found nowhere to sit because the white section was full. Bus drivers had the authority to make black passengers move for white passengers, even if they were sitting in the black section. The bus driver asked Colvin and her friends to get up, which her friends immediately did. She refused to move. On her mind were the lessons she has learned throughout her life, especially during Negro History Month at her school just days before. Though her friends' seats, one next to Colvin and 2 across the aisle, were now vacant, the white woman refused to sit in them because, according to Jim Crow laws, black people could not sit next to white people. They had to sit behind white people to show their inferiority. When asked again, Colvin refused to get up. The bus driver alerted the traffic police, and 3 stops later, a traffic officer came onto the bus and asked her why she was sitting there and why she would not get up. She replied, "Because it's my constitutional right," and told him she was not breaking the segregation law by sitting there. The traffic officer told the bus driver that the police needed to get involved. A stop or 2 later, 2 police officers came onto the bus and instructed Colvin to get up. She refused. She later said, "I could not move because history had made me glued to the seat. Sojourner Truth's hands were pushing me down on one shoulder, and Harriet Tubman's hands were pushing me down on another shoulder." Okay, so this is a very deep text, as you can see, and I'm sure you all know this text very well. Okay, let's read this last paragraph. The police officers each grabbed one of her arms, kicked her, threw her books from her lap, and manhandled her off the bus. They shoved her in their police car, handcuffed her through the windows, and took her off to jail. She was the first person to be arrested for challenging Montgomery's bus segregation laws. Okay, so like I said, some of you may have been familiar with Rosa Parks. Probably all of you are familiar with her. She did this on the bus, but this was before Rosa Parks, we know from the title, right? And it's Claudette Colvin, and she was in school. She was school age, so that's very fascinating. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to look at this closer, and we're going to take our time through it so that we fully understand it and really dive deep into what's happening. So the first thing I want you to do is I want to focus you on these first 2 sentences. After school on March 2nd, 1955, Claudette Colvin walked to downtown Montgomery with 3 of her classmates. She and her friends were going to take the city bus home from school that day. Okay. So this is important. Sorry, I'm going to keep reading. When they boarded the bus, they sat behind the first 5 rows, which were reserved for white passengers. All right, I'm going to stop there. First 3 sentences. So what I want you to do is I want you to visualize what you are seeing right now. So kind of close your eyes, visualize, and I want you to picture like what is happening, okay? So what I want you to do is, based off the text so far, I want you to grab anything you have next to you, a piece of paper, anything, and a pencil. I have mine here. And I want you to sketch a picture of what this bus looks like in your mind. Okay, the little question is going to come up, and it's going to ask you, did you draw your sketch? Yes or no. So make sure you click yes and truly draw your sketch of what you're picturing in your mind of this bus. Okay, reread that little sentence if you need to. Go. All right, good. So now let's look at this next part. A young white woman boarded the bus after Colvin and her friends and found nowhere to sit because the white section was full. Okay, good. So now what I want you to do is I want you to take your sketch that you just drew, I have mine here, and I want you to add in that the first 5 rows of the bus are full. So however you want to draw that on there, how I did it is I did it kind of like this, my beautiful drawing. It's like over the top of the bus. There's the bus driver, and then we have the first 5 rows are all full and are reserved for white passengers.
Is that too loud?
Okay, so let's keep going. So now look at this next sentence. It says, bus drivers have the authority to make black passengers move for white passengers, even if they were sitting in the black section. Okay, so let's look at this paragraph 2, and let's think of this word authority. So bus drivers had the authority. So what authority means is that they had the rules were that they could do that. So bus drivers were allowed to make black passengers move for white passengers, even if they were sitting in the black section, which seems sad. So even if her friends are sitting back here in the black section of the bus, they could still be forced to move, because if these were all full too, and a new white person gets on the bus. Okay? So let's keep going. We're going to read the rest of this paragraph. The bus driver asked Colvin and her friends to get up, which her friends immediately did. She refused to move. On her mind were the lessons she had learned throughout her life, especially during Negro History Month, at her school just days before. Though her friends' seats, one next to Colvin and 2 across the aisle, were now vacant, empty, the white woman refused to sit in them because, according to Jim Crow laws, black people could not sit next to white people. They had to sit behind white people to show their inferiority. When asked again, Colvin refused to get up. Okay, quick question for you. What connection can you make between what's happening to Claudette right here, Claudette Colvin, and what happened in chapter 7 of the Hope Chest, of what we just read? So what connection can you make between what we just read in here and the Hope Chest? Go. Okay, good. So hopefully you connected that Myrtle was forced to move, just like Claudette Colvin is being forced to move because of segregation laws. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you now is, why did Claudette refuse to move? Why did Claudette refuse to move? We're in the second paragraph. I'm asking you this question, and I want you to find evidence in this paragraph to support your answer. Why did Claudette refuse to move? Go. Okay, go. Okay, good. So you know that she refused to move because of these Jim Crow laws, right? She refused to move because of the lessons she learned throughout her life, right? During Negro History Month at her school, and things like that. Okay. So let's look at these sentences here. I'm going to dive into these. So it says, though her friend's seats, one next to Colvin and 2 across the aisle, were now vacant, the woman refused to sit in them because, according to the Jim Crow laws, black people could not sit next to white people. Okay, Jim Crow laws were terrible laws that were separating white people and African Americans in the southern states of the United States. Okay, And these laws were made by white people who felt they were superior or better and felt they deserved to be treated better. This is racism, right? It's now illegal. And this separation of white people from African Americans is called segregation, okay? So Jim Crow laws were not great at all. All right. I want to ask you this question here. What does vacant mean? What do you think vacant means? Look at the clues in the text. Her seats were now vacant. What do you think vacant means? Go. Okay, good. Vacant means empty. So hopefully you got something along those lines. All right, so let's look at this next sentence. They had to sit behind white people to show their inferiority. When asked again, Colvin refused to get up. Okay, so this is kind of sad and kind of goes along with those Jim Crow laws about how white people wanted to be better. So they had to sit behind white people because white people wanted to feel better than the black people. All right, so now that we've read this paragraph here, I want you to tell me the gist. What is the gist of this paragraph? Go. All right, good. So now what we're going to do is we're going to move on. The gist of this paragraph should have been something along about how Claudette Colvin and her classmates were asked to move, but Claudette refused. I like Claudette. All right, let's look at these next two sentences. The bus driver alerted the traffic police, and 3 stops later, a traffic officer came onto the bus and asked her why she was sitting there and why she would not get up. She replied, "Because it's my constitutional right," and told him that she was not breaking the segregation law by sitting there. Okay, Claudette said, because it's my constitutional right. Okay? My constitutional right. What does that mean to you? So it means that she was right because she's not breaking the law by sitting there, right? It says so in the text right here. So it's her constitutional right. She's not breaking the law. Okay. Let's look at the next 4 sentences here. The traffic officer told the bus driver that the police needed to get involved. A stop or 2 later, 2 police officers came onto the bus and instructed Colvin to get up. She refused. She later said, "I could not move because history had me glued to the seat." Sojourner Truth's hands were pushing me down on one shoulder, and Harriet Tubman's hands were pushing me down on another shoulder. Okay, Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman are 2 African American women who are very famous for fighting to end slavery in the United States. So Claudette is thinking of these 2 women in history in that moment because they're big people in history who made an impact on slavery. They're African Americans, and obviously Claudette looks up to them. They're kind of like heroes to her. So now that I just told you all of that, why did Claudette Colvin think of Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman when told by the police to move? All right, good. We're getting through this. Okay. And she may have been learning about them in class, right? Because earlier in this text, it says that she was learning about them in Negro History Month. So, all right. So now that we've read this paragraph here, I want you to tell me, what is the gist of paragraph 3? Go. All right, good. So something along the lines of, hopefully you wrote something about even when the police came, Claudette still refused to move. All right, let's look at this final paragraph. We're going to read it aloud. Please read it with me if you'd like. The police officers each grabbed one of her arms, kicked her, threw her books from her lap, and manhandled her off the bus. They shoved her in the police car, handcuffed her through the windows, and took her off to jail. She was the first person to be arrested for challenging Montgomery's bus segregation laws. So before I jump into this, this makes me very emotional just because, oh, it's so sad how these police officers treated her. So I'm going to ask you this question. How did the police officers treat Claudette, and how do you know? Use evidence from the text. So look in this paragraph. How did they treat Claudette, and how do you know? Go. Okay, good. So now that you've done that, I now want you to think about the gist of this paragraph. What is the gist of this paragraph here? Great. So hopefully you said something along the lines of the police officers took Claudette off the bus with force, right? And she was put in jail and charged. All right. Man, this was an emotional read. So hopefully you saw the connection of this between the hope chest and how Myrtle kind of went through the same situation. She wasn't arrested, but still was forced to move somewhere because of these Jim Crow laws and segregation and all of that horrible things that have been in our past, in our history's past. So let's just try to move on. I know that's hard after this deep text, but you have one more little activity to do after this. You're thinking about firsthand or secondhand next, so be ready for that.